Chapter 1. It was not quite dawn in the street by the river. Not yet. It was coming to the end of one of those nights in mid-September when the moon pulls at the tide as the estuary begins a slow flood, rising sometimes several feet above its original level, defying last season's high tide marks and the notion that the river itself is a forgotten element, irrelevant now to commerce and the season's changes. Now the river was coming silently back under the pale glow of a moon half hidden by clouds. A full moon except for its obscurity. A silver disk in a steady lightening sky. Along the mid-Victorian street, which had once housed the movers and shakers from another era, merchants, bank managers, financiers and steel manufacturers, even the occasional retired sea captain. Sandbags lay carefully stacked along the railings by the side of the river path. The last 2 winters had once again proved the river's unpredictability, reasserting it like a lost story in the memory of the town. No one was taking any chances now. When the alarm clock went off half an hour too early, Gwendraeth James knew that it was going to be a bad day. At 5:30, he tried his best to quiet the huge, old-fashioned wind-up machine that he kept in a biscuit tin on his bedside table. Ever since his wife had left him 2 months before, he'd been in danger of oversleeping and had resurrected a technique he'd used when he'd first joined the police force years ago. It worked mostly, even if it couldn't help with the ache in his head and the dryness on his tongue. At 6:15, he gave up trying to sleep anymore. Light was poking its way through the curtains in the back of the house he'd decided to use as a bedroom ever since Sheila had left. He couldn't bear using the big room at the front, the one they'd always used since they'd bought the place 2 years previously. The house, a tall, narrow Victorian near the river, had been too big for them even then. But Sheila had liked it, and despite the price, Gwendraeth had agreed to their buying it because he thought it would help. Now he was stuck with it, he thought, heaving himself out of the hard, fold-down futon that he'd dragged into the back bedroom immediately after she told him that she was going to Cardiff with John Wyndham and that he needn't expect her back. "Trouble with you, Gwendraeth, is that even for a detective, you have very little imagination," she'd said. He remembered his own response. "What do you mean, even for a detective?" "I mean," Sheila said, "that when your wife's having an affair with your best friend right under your nose, the very least you can do is notice." "He's not my best friend." "He's the nearest thing to a friend you got." He hadn't said anything to her for a while. Just stood there watching her throw things into the large black suitcase they'd bought several years before when they'd gone on that terrible holiday to Portugal. He knew that he should have noticed what Sheila was up to, especially with John Wyndham. But the truth was, things had been better, quieter, and he'd even thought they might have been improving. "Well?" "Well, what?" "You could try and stop me." "Do you want me to?" "No." "So what's the point then?" "Typical." Sheila finished throwing her things into the soft-top suitcase and then zipped it up. "Look," Gwendraeth James had said after a while, "either you are running away with John Wyndham or you're not. Either way, it's very little to do with me." "It's everything to do with you if only you had the sense to see it. And I'm not running away." "No? What are you doing then?" "I'm going to Cardiff. John's going to start his own consultancy." Gwendraeth knew that John Wyndham had been talking about starting his own business for years, but he had never actually expected him to do anything about it, especially not with his own wife. The whole thing had an air of unreality about it. "We could get counselling," Gwendraeth said, as Sheila began to lift the suitcase off the bed. "Too late." "What about another holiday in Portugal?" "Much too late. That might have worked 3 years ago, before we even bought this place, but now... Yes? You've got to face it. I'm in love with another man, and you are really married to your job, anyway. I am? Yes. That's not the first time I've told you, is it? As Sheila refused his help and struggled with the suitcase down the stairs, Gwendraeth James had to admit she was right. She told him many times about his obsessive concern with work and that his inability to communicate properly with her would lead to disaster. And now, well, here it was. That had been 3 months ago, he thought, coming down the stairs into the hall and through to the kitchen in the back of the house. And nothing had got better since then. The place was a mess. Just before Sheila had left, he'd taken down some of the kitchen cabinets and bought others to replace them. The new ones still lay in their flat packs against the radiator. Well, he supposed he would get around to fitting them one day. He opened one of the remaining cupboards, got out some coffee and powdered milk and slopped some water into the coffee machine. While the coffee brewed, he looked at the small paved courtyard at the back of the house. The day was still grey. When his coffee was ready, Gwendraeth carried it into the front room, which was tall and high-ceiling, still with the original fireplace. He opened the shutters and looked out at the river. Below, an increasingly light mist rose in patches. The sandbags, stacked in rows, lay where the workmen had placed them the day before yesterday. It was quiet. A few cars did pass along the road that separated his home from the river, but nothing much. It was too early. He was grateful for the quiet. He was lucky in a way, he knew. He'd been waking up like this ever since his wife had left, but now there was no tension. That had gone and been replaced by a quiet deadness. That was the way it had been since Sheila had gone. His only change or extravagance in that period had been the purchase of a 6-year-old silver BMW Z3. He knew what the neighbours were probably saying about that, and he didn't care. And he still had his job. An hour and a half later, Gwendraeth James pulled into his parking place in front of the new headquarters at the top of Miser Bont. Less than 5 years old, it was one of those squarish, soulless buildings meant to impress with its obvious efficiency. Blue outside steelwork and unpainted concrete. His boss, Chief Superintendent Harding, had called it the new brutalism. Well, he'd been right. Gwendraeth made his way through the building and up to his office on the 3rd floor. It was a cube-like space within the larger cube structure. It contained a desk, 2 chairs, a computer, some shelves, and a filing cabinet. Since he'd taken down the framed photograph of Sheila, there was nothing about the personality of the man who inhabited the room. No certificates or mementos, and that was the way he liked it. The first hour or so was quiet enough. He logged into the computer and dealt with a series of reports from the week before. A robbery in Gwendraeth, an assault when 2 brothers had tried to drown their best friend in the river, an attempted burglary near All Saints Church. The usual run of things. Then, around 9:15, there was a knock on his office door, and in walked his assistant, Detective Sergeant Harry Warden, who immediately said, "Suppose you've heard, have you, Chief?" "Heard what?" "Car over a cliff, or a decline, near Treddeg." "It's where the old rectory is, isn't it?" "Correct. And stop saying correct, will you? Makes you sound like something out the American military." "I'll try, Chief," Harry Warden said. He stood by Gwendraeth's desk, waiting for another response. This morning he was wearing a black suit with a black shirt and a black tie that was too narrow. His spiky hair had been cut short again, with the result that it stuck out at odd angles from his head. The total effect, Gwendraeth thought, looked too much like a trendy undertaker. But then Harry Warden was over 10 years younger than he was, and quite a lot slimmer. "What kind of car?" "Pardon, Chief?" "The one over the cliff. Harry Warden consulted his notebook. Red Toyota, Camry. Owner? We're checking on that now. Oh, and I forgot. There's someone in it. A body? Correct. Gwendraeth shot his subordinate a warning look, grabbed his jacket and car keys, and started to make his way out of the office. Harry Warden followed, but got to the lift at the end of the corridor. You've been running again, Gwendraeth said as they punched the button for the lift. 15 miles yesterday, Harry Warden said with a grin. I've broken the half marathon. You watch yourself, Gwendraeth replied as the lift came up and they got into it. Last thing I need is a detective sergeant with a twisted ankle. They reached the ground floor in silence and walked out of the building towards Gwendraeth James' car. On the way, Gwendraeth got Harry Warden to phone for a pathologist and a tow truck. The local constable was already in place and had arranged for the photographer. 20 minutes later, they reached the road that led down to the rectory at Treddeg. It was a fine morning. The sun broke through a dark bank of clouds, illuminating the grass and the hedge that ran along the bank that formed the boundary. Before this, to the left of the rectory road, was a steep grass bank that led to the ditch, and at the bottom of the ditch was the red Toyota Camry, which was canted over on its side. It's not a cliff, Gwendraeth James said, as he and Harry Warden got out of the car and began their descent. It's not a decline either. It's a gully. Agreed. At the bottom of the gully, a meaty-looking constable was standing guard over the car. David Pritchard. Gwendraeth James knew him and had played rugby against him when they were younger. Morning, Di. Any angles? Constable David Pritchard looked up as they finished their descent. Head at the steering wheel, he said without any expression. Gash on his forehead. Nasty looking. No doubt he's dead. Not unless you believe in eternal life, Chief. Gwendraeth gave Di Pritchard a hard look. He'd always fancied himself, Di Pritchard had, and there were rumours that he sometimes travelled to Swansea on a Saturday night to try his hand at stand-up comedy. When he approached the battered Toyota, Gwendraeth James could see the body slumped against the steering wheel as Di Pritchard had indicated. It had belonged to a tallish, sandy-haired but old-fashioned cotton anorak. His head was slumped down and his long legs jammed at an awkward angle against the foot pedals. There was blood on the dashboard and some on the splintered windscreen, but less overall than Gwendraeth had expected. Taking care to disturb the corpse as little as possible, he fished into the front pocket of the anorak and produced a clean handkerchief and a thin leather wallet. Parker Merriam, he said, looking at the driver's license. Sergeant Harry Warden was standing back, keeping his distance. Doesn't sound Welsh, does he? Neither did you, Gwendraeth said, extricating himself from the car as best he could. I can't help that, Chief. I've been here since I was 10. Harry Warden's family had moved to Wales from Croydon or somewhere when he'd been much younger. But it was something that Gwendraeth always teased him about when he could. Address near Bridgend. It's not what the DVLC says, Harry Warden replied when he came off the phone a few minutes later. Car's registered to a Paul James in the old rectory. He indicated the direction downhill with a jerk of his head. Makes sense, I suppose, Gwendraeth James said. After pathology's been, we'll go and see about it. They had to wait another 20 minutes or so till Dr. Aneurin Howells arrived. A short man with dark brown hair always falling over his forehead, Howells was something of a mystery to Gwendraeth. Why, for instance, did he always wear a waistcoat and sports jacket like somebody out of a previous generation? Why was he always so unfailingly courteous and non-committal at the same time? It's infuriating. Aneurin Howells got out of his Volvo, nodded to Gwendraeth, and immediately scrambled down the steps towards them. A little while later, he finished his examination, turned to Gwendraeth and said, "Much as it looks. What's that supposed to mean?" "Broken neck. Head hit the steering wheel after the car went out of control. Been dead a couple of hours, probably." "Blackout? Heart attack? Anything like that?" "Too early to tell. Have to wait for the autopsy." "Tell me something I don't know," Gwendraeth thought, but out loud. He was polite enough. "Thank you, Doctor." And Iron Howells closed the car door and came towards him. "Have you noticed, Gwendraeth? I always call you by your first name, but you always call me Doctor." "Everybody calls me Gwendraeth," Gwendraeth James said. "I'll give you a call when I'm ready for the autopsy," Iron Howells said. "You can bring him, if he can stand it." He nodded at Harry Warden. The last time Harry Warden had witnessed an autopsy, he'd thrown up all over the corpse, Gwendraeth remembered. Hadn't even been anything sinister, just a 62-year-old woman knocked over by a hit and run when she'd been on her way to collect her pension. "I'll think about it." Gwendraeth watched as the pathologist began to climb back up the slope towards his car. "The question is, Chief," Harry Warden said a little while after the doctor departed, "what made Parker Merriam go over the edge?" "Brilliant." "I'm not like you. I'm not afraid to ask the obvious." "You could say that again." "I'm not afraid to—" "I don't mean literally, Warden." Something bothering Gwendraeth, and he couldn't locate what it was. It was somehow all looking too predictable, too neat. "There's still the owner of the vehicle to interview." Harry Warden was anxious to get on with it too. "We have to wait for the wagon." While they waited for the ambulance, which would take the body to the mortuary, they double-checked the track and the verge. There were no obvious footprints because of the rain that morning, and no sign of any other vehicle being involved. Something, or someone, caused him to lose control, Harry Warden said. He'd never have veered off that track on purpose. "Unless it was suicide," Gwendraeth suggested. "Not in a borrowed car. Not everybody's as scrupulous as you are, Warden. He's not the kind who looks as though he was depressed. He's wearing an anorak." "What's that supposed to mean?" "Old-fashioned, outdoorsy type," Harry Warden said. "Leather boots, cotton anorak. Something bothers somebody like that, they walk it off, or go climbing." "Too old for that, wasn't he?" "Fit-looking bagger, though. Stringy." While it bothered Gwendraeth James to admit it, everything his subordinate had just said was true. Well, for the moment, there was nothing to do but wait. After the wagon had come and taken the body to the morgue, the tow vehicle would haul the Toyota out of the ditch and take it back to the yard for examination. Meantime, there was the owner of the vehicle to interview.